The theme for this, AI, I came up with this one not because I actually have any expertise whatsoever in this thing. I know a little bit about machine learning, but I know next to nothing about artificial intelligence. But I thought it's an extremely interesting topic and something which social science really ought to be engaging with. So a bit like as many were saying last night. And so this is a kind of warm-up session, and the idea is to just kind of do a few little straightforward things like defining stuff and give some examples of the ones I can think. But I want to make this a bit of an interactive session if we can, so that this is my thoughts, but I don't know everything about AI, and you guys may well know something which I don't know, and let's share it and be a bit interactive. So please interrupt me at any point during the presentation. It's an interactive session, not me spouting for a while. So I'll talk about some examples. I'll talk about what I think are the supposed, the potential positives of AI, and also some of the negatives. And then we'll get onto this issue about what the role of social science is or could be in this. And I'm going to be very provocative in the last bit and try and poke you into a bit of thinking about it. So just a little bit of sort of thinking about these things in the bigger scheme of things. I'm actually retired. I retired a while back, and I was born in the 1950s. And we didn't have a television in my house until I was about, I think it was about 6 or 7 before we had a television. And this wasn't because my family was poor. I had a nice middle-class upbringing. We could afford a colour telly, but we got a black and white telly when I was about 6 or 7. And that completely changed my life at home. Although my dad was a public school educated aerospace engineer, he got into Coronation Street big time and ate his tea on the settee watching the telly. This completely changed it. No more sitting at the table eating my meal. It was a big change. I did my PhD and I wrote it up on a Sinclair Spectrum. It's a Sinclair Spectrum. If you've not seen one of those, anybody's ever used one of those will know that this is quite a beast. My MSc I had to type. But I had this change, during the time between being an MSc student and a PhD student, I actually could afford my own computer, a personal computer. That got changed, the internet comes along, and of course, smartphones now, we engage massively with our smartphones. We're relying on you to have a smartphone in order for you to know which room to be in at this conference. We haven't given you any paper. So, we're really heavily reliant on it. There's a whole load of downsides for all of these technologies. I'm not going to list them, but I'm sure you can guess what they all are, trolling and so on, and sitting down a lot. And we were going to sit down, by the way, for this conference most of the time, and it's really bad for you to sit down for extended periods of time. So there's a whole load of things which follow from these technologies. But I think if you asked people, would you like to abandon these technologies now, I think the population as a whole would say, no, we'd really rather like to hang on to them. And thinking ahead, that's what's going to happen with AI. Currently, we have a situation where we've moved from, when I was a kid, nearly all my social contacts were with people who were geographically proximal to me. Nowadays, I talk to people who I haven't seen for a decade, but I can still talk to them all the time. So things have changed. So a little bit about that, just to keep that in mind while we think about AI. So some simple definitions, there's lots out there. Excuse me. Some kind of human cognitive activity. So decision-making, problem-solving, reasoning, creativity of some sort. And some of the more sort of sci-fi definitions also require AI systems to be autonomous and have self-awareness. That's a little bit off the end of the scale, I think, just at the moment, although, as you saw on my previous slide, there was a guy at Google the other week who claimed that the Google chat system was sentient. But people often confuse AI with machine learning. Machine learning is essentially the mathematical modeling that goes on underlying an AI system. The system is a bigger thing than the machine learning. It's not, it could be AI systems without machine learning as well, but that's a different issue. But the machine learning bit is just the algorithms. The system deals with not just the learning bit, but how the data is collected and what's done with it afterwards. Okay, a little bit about machine learning. Does anybody here machine learn? Is anybody already? There's a wave of a hand down the front here. Any other machine learners folk out there? Another one. When I first looked at a book about machine learning, I thought, hang on a second, I know half of this already. Right? Most machine learning algorithms are based around variations of either regression or things like cluster analysis and factor analysis. And all that's happened in machine learning is that more flavors of regression and more flavors of clustering techniques have been developed and used. But the idea, when you whip out a multiple regression to test something on your data, you're saying, oh, I believe there's a linear relationship between some set of predictors and some set of outcomes. That's only one possible model, but you test that against your data, and the only thing you're not doing is usually testing it against new data. And so that's what's going on there. Right, existing applications. So I'm going to list through the ones I could think of, and then you can tell me the ones I have got here. Now I'm talking about ones which you can actually use by experience today, as opposed to ones which might be there. So we already have speech recognition and face recognition. This picture here is a Chinese security agent with an eyeglass-mounted facial recognition system. It works now, it's there. It's a bit spooky, but it's there, and that happens already. And pattern recognition is super important in industry because when something doesn't conform to a pattern, it indicates a fault. And so you can have fast fault detection with AI systems, which is really, really, really useful thing. Predictive analytics, who's going to default on their loan payments, who should we insure, which constituency is going to vote for which parties, and so on, which stocks will increase. That already happens on stock markets. Those things are there already. Another class of things, recommendation engines. You've all seen Minority Report. Have you seen the film Minority Report? Tom Cruise. And he goes in the shop and the shop says, oh, you were looking at the jeans last week. Do we have a new pair over here? Obviously, that's what happens to you when you log on to Google and Amazon, etc. That's what they're doing, recommendation engines. Sentiment analysis, trawling through social media, looking for patterns of affect-object links. That's what Cambridge Analytica were doing. Again, extremely powerful set of procedures. And then there's creative stuff. Some people argue whether this is creative or not, but if you do Google music generators, you can have yourself a song in about half an hour, which sounds really rather good, even though it's entirely made up by the machine. You don't need to be able to play an instrument, know anything about music theory, and Shazam, you can have it, and it sounds okay. People argue whether it's good music or not, and that's a different issue, but that's there already. Any other ones you can think of?
There's image-to-text synthesis, which kind of comes from pattern recognition, but where you can show it a picture of something, and it can write you a description of what it is.
Yeah, did you hear that at the back? Yeah, good. Okay, there's nods at the back, so they heard that. Yeah, I mean, that's a sort of pattern recognition taken to the next level, isn't it? Any other ones? Yeah?
I think similar to what was said, but my Samsung phone, for example, if someone was wearing a particular outfit and I liked it and I turned the camera on, it would tell me where they purchased it from, so I don't have to ask.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the... it's worrying, isn't it, the first few times it happens to you? Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah.
It's just similar to creating art. You sort of mentioned it with music, but another big thing is generative art as well. So people creating art using software.
Visual art. Yeah. Yes.
There is a company called Beauty AI, and with your phone, you can, if for example you want to see the color of your hair or the makeup, you can see in advance, and you can see different sunglasses.
Yep. Yeah, it's a virtual mirror sort of thing in the shop. Yeah. Any other ones? Yeah.
There has been a lot of debate the last few days. I don't know whether anybody has seen that about an algorithm writing its own application.
Yeah.
And submitting it to a journal.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that would be quite handy, wouldn't it? You wouldn't have to bother with this PhD nonsense, etc. Just get the machine to write your papers for you. Okay. Thinking about stuff in the pipeline, we've got obviously medical diagnosis and treatments, particularly those that are going to involve knowing something about your genes, your your genetic makeup. Clearly that's extremely computationally intensive, not the kind of thing people could do very easily, but something which an AI system could do very quickly. We already have automation and replacement of human workers, but many more systems are now being developed to do things which aren't the cutting metal in a car factory sort of thing. They're much more about mimicking human decisions and taking those forwards. Driverless cars is they're there, but not quite there. We can't buy one yet. So the technology is there, but we haven't quite got around to getting it going. Autonomous weapon systems, a lot of debate if you're following your Ukraine war about whether some people should try out some of these autonomous drones. They can't then be shot down because there's no signal going to them, they're operating on their own. You set off the drone, kind of fire and forget version of drones. Clearly, there's echoes of the Terminator film there. How do you control those kinds of things? But nonetheless, the technology is being developed. And then one which I saw here, and which I hadn't occurred to me at all, but which actually it's both spooky and good at the same time, is creating avatars, virtual friends for people who are lonely. And I've seen prototypes of this. One's got a Scottish lady, who's very nice Scottish lady, very soft accent, etc., who can hold fairly simple conversations with an old, somebody who's in the late stages of dementia. And so they have a kind of person there they can talk to, even though the conversation never goes particularly far. But of course, in principle, it could go much further as the technology goes on. Any other ones which you can think of? Yep.
I think there is an even spookier version from the last point there. There is as we generate more and more information on social media about ourselves and our lives and our pictures and everything like that, the spookier version of that is afterlife. And whether I think there have been cases already in the past where someone has been trying to almost resurrect people from the dead, and based on the information they get from the social media and artificial intelligence, get them to effectively create the persona and recreate the person, and having conversations with them, and obviously they've got all the memories through the social media. For younger generations, they will have more and more informations. For older generations, obviously not as much.
Now you mentioned that, there was a Hollywood film that had that relatively recently, wasn't there? One about some guy who was a reclusive who was making an AI system so he could live on forever. But yeah, that's that's an interesting one. Yeah, yep.
I think with the medical one, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe there's already nanobots and things that you can put inside the patient, maybe performing the operations inside.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I hadn't included that as AI because I kind of assumed that'd be controlled, but yeah, it might well have more AI in it than I was thinking. Yeah. Any others?
During the start of online teaching for COVID, I saw something about a program where they're trying to basically develop a GCSE level AI teacher.
Yeah.
GCSEs and A levels, there's a lot of learning material.
Yeah.
Rather than critiquing it, so they were thinking that they could just teach something with the curriculum.
Well, this is the interesting one. I mean, coming back to the thing about replacing more complicated human jobs, if teaching can be done, we're all in trouble here, chaps. It's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult if those lectureships are not required, because social psychology 101 can be taught by some avatar who knows it all already. That could be interesting. Okay, because we haven't got all too long here.
If I may.
Yeah.
I've got a question that AI and machine learning and all these algorithms are based on human intelligence and information of data from real people making decisions. And they're basically a learning process. So if we start substituting humans with artificial intelligence, do we actually think that there is a barrier to that learning? Because humans have different things, they can think in different ways, they might have rational or irrational behavior, they can make new decisions that basically break away from their past, whilst artificial intelligence might not be able to do that. And it might be that it's learning on its own pattern, and therefore that learning process, and this is why it comes from, psychology 1. If you got a human being there, obviously they can monitor what's happening in the discipline, but they bring their own experience, they bring their own interactions with others, and therefore there is a learning that we can then feed into the machine, and the machine can progress. If we get the machine to do that, will that learning take place, or are we going to basically stop learning?
Yeah, I mean, that's, if you take that back a level, what you get the AI system or the machine learning part of it to do, what data you present to it is at the moment a human choice. At some point, it might not be a human choice, but if I decide that variables X, Y, and Z are important in predicting people's defaulting on a loan, and those aren't the things that predict defaulting on a loan, the system is always going to be suboptimal. But if you let the system pick its own, the basis on which it learns, then of course that gets us a step further. Yeah. Yep.
Just thinking on that one of the advantages is that AI systems can find different approaches. So like the AI that beat a human expert at Go, human experts looking at how it played, it wasn't like a very, very good human. It took its whole own approach, which it seems like in scientific fields that could be very useful, but it's not just doing what we're doing better.
Yeah. I mean, if I can skip ahead a couple of slides just to follow a little bit on that, I'll come back to this one. I was just going to make this point about using machine learning in your own research. And it's a bit like what Fife-Schaw was saying. When you decide you've got a collection of data, this isn't a social science example, but if you've got a set of data here and it looks like there's some linear relationship going on in there, our default human thing is to say, well, let's do a regression here, because that's what it's for. But of course, when you pick that out, you've already made a choice, even if you didn't think about it, to test a linear model. If you then say to a system, no, you can pick any model you like, then you've got the possibility of finding out something which you wouldn't have found out otherwise from it. So, I mean, in this particular example, it's the horsepower of a car against how much fuel it uses. And you can see that although a linear relationship looks sort of all right, the kind of orangey line here, a sort of more complicated regression model does a better job. And there are many, many models you could use for any given data set. So you wanted to come back on this?
I was just going to say, like, moving away from modeling human behaviors, there's a big kind of topic at the moment in search engine research where people are looking at patterns in nature and trying to follow those. So I know there's a big thing about like looking at how ants move and how bees move and make decisions together and trying to model that instead of like a human way of thinking. And that produces very different results, which is really cool.
At the moment, we need the human in the process to say, let's look at ants. The clever thing is when we don't need the human to say, let's look at ants. That's the thing. I mean, obviously, as I said in this slide at the top here, there's potential with AI to get insights into human behavior without having a theory, without actually having a theory at all. If you've got no preconceptions about what should be happening, then potentially these kind of techniques could reveal something which you'd never otherwise found out. Yeah.
So if it's just data-driven and you don't need a theory, can that be, I don't know, biased in a way? And is it ethical?
Well, there is our debate question for this session. Is it ethical or not? Is having a theory inherently a good thing if it doesn't predict the data? If something which doesn't have a theory predicts the data better, which one would you rather we had? I'm being provocative here. I'm trying to think. Yeah?
You don't have to go back to creating some sort of theory or narrative in order to talk about it, David. You're not going to just, maybe you would just have a data set and a set of results, but you then need to write about it or talk to people about it, or it's going to have some implications for real life. And so you then end up having something that looks like a theory or a narrative in order to then talk about the results you've got anyway. So you'll always end up, it feels like maybe at some point you can imagine having no theory and just having papers which
Yeah, you are going to have to account for it in some way, but you wouldn't have to have it in advance. It comes a bit back to what you're saying about looking at ants, etc., whether or not you have imposed your own framework on what should happen before you set the machine off, or you let the machine go and then you try to interpret what it comes up with afterwards. Is the interesting thing. We're running a bit short of time, so I'm just going to ping back if I can. Potential benefits, obviously, speed, efficiency, potential lower costs. Human beings are expensive to employ. Once you've got an AI system that makes some kind of decisions, you don't need to do it again. There are also some benefits in the sense that the underlying code for doing AI things is in the public domain. So, Python and R can do a lot of the things which you need to do to make an AI system. It's democratized in that sense, and that's a good thing. And there's potential benefits in terms of quicker fraud detection, cybersecurity, and so on. Any others you can think of? I mean, we have already mentioned some other ones which I didn't mention earlier. Nope. Okay, what about the negatives? Well, big tech changes always produce winners and losers. So who's going to lose? I've got my picture of my Amazon drone there. At the moment, my wife's gone on a bit of an Amazon spree. We have 1 or 2 Amazon deliveries every day. And some guy or woman comes around with knocks on the door and runs away and leaves it on the doorstep. But that person potentially is out of a job if there are quicker autonomous ways of delivering parcels. But it's not just those people. We talked earlier on about having the O-level, whatever it is, teacher, the avatar who delivers physics A-level course. It could be a lot of people put out of work. There's this argument, some of you may have come across the concept of elite overproduction, the idea that societies can get themselves into a situation where they produce a better educated population than there are jobs for them to do, and that this potentially leads to dissatisfaction in the population. What are we going to do with all of these people who potentially we don't have work for them? What are they going to do? There's almost definitely going to be a greater inequality in wealth distribution, and how we're going to deal with that. And there'll be impacts on the social welfare system. If instead of, I don't know, whatever it is, 95% of the working age population are in jobs, there's suddenly only 80% in jobs. What are we going to do with that? And who's going to pay? The person who came up with the AI that got rid of the jobs? The person who's using the AI system? You and me, the taxpayer? There's another thing which I think is almost definitely going to happen. There's going to be greater disparity between industrialized and non-industrialized nations. Some poor folk in the third world are not going to be having their Amazon deliveries by a drone. And that is I'm pretty sure that's going to be an outcome. And what about the value of creativity? If we get to a situation where we don't need Adele to write a #1 pop song, or Kate Bush even 34 years later, or whatever it is, if we don't need Kate Bush, what is the value of the activities of Kate Bush-like people, humans? What value do we put on it? Copyright and so on. There's more negatives you'll notice here than positives. There's obviously questions about owning data and policing data and impacts on privacy. There's issues about abrogation of responsibility for decision making. So let's say we all suddenly have driverless cars, and I'm sure you've come across this already, that there's this big debate about what to do when driverless cars are put in this situation where a crash is inevitable, and you have the question, sort of moral dilemma, do you run over the old lady or the child? It's obviously highly contrived, but nonetheless, there will be mistakes, and there will be questions of responsibility. You can't blame the car, really, so somebody's got to be blamed. And this one I like this one a lot because I've already suffered from this one. Increased laziness and passivity. All right. This here is a screenshot from an app called Savvy Navi. Now, since I retired, I've been sailing boats around all over the place. And when you sail a boat, it's actually quite complicated. You have to do a passage plan, you have charts out, you have to work out tides and winds and all this kind of stuff, etc. But Savvy Navi will do it for you. Okay. And since we've had Savvy Navi on board, we've just let it do it. We just follow the machine. We've given up. And of course, every so often it gets it wrong, and then you think, oh God, it's not perfect. But that kind of system has encouraged laziness. I don't do a passage plan now, even though strictly speaking, legally I'm supposed to. But I don't do them anymore because Savvy Navi will do it for me. And all of these kind of systems, I think, are potentially going to encourage us to just sit back. So what are we going to do with ourselves while we're sitting back? And then just finally on this slide, the same point I had as a positive, the very fact that the access to the technology is pretty open means that bad actors can do stuff as well. So this obviously is a potential risk. You thought of any other ones? No, of course, yeah.
Can I be a bit provocative again in terms of, you mentioned that disparity. So these systems rely on data for their learning. And we obviously know that in our part of the world, data is in abundance. But what happens when you go to African countries, for example? So are we running the danger of developing systems that will reflect only parts of the society and not effectively everyone?
Yeah, I mean that's what was underlying my point about yes. I mean, if there's no data, you can't kind of do that kind of thing. So there's one down here first.
I had two. This energy usage, because that's not all clean and renewable yet, and the more complicated processes we're doing all the time, the more we're going to be using energy. But more of a weird one. If people are interacting with avatars or programs that appear to them like human agents that they know are not human, I feel like that can, I think it's already happening with Alexa. People interact, and sort of can be very sexist and misogynist, and then that's people practicing behaving to something that feels human to them in a way that might spill over into how people feel and think about actual humans.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll come back to these. Yeah. Yep.
Going back to what Francesco said, so let's say we have the data. So I'm thinking about what Amazon did a couple of years ago with the experiment in hiring, and they used AI, and they had the data, but obviously that data was discriminatory towards women, because in the past 10 years they've been hiring men. So I'm kind of like, even if we have the data, what kind of problems can we incur in terms of discrimination when the data is already biased?
Yeah, okay, but there's lots of hands going up here, so I want to collect those. So that's an interesting one. I quite like that one. Yeah, so it's over here and then to yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I think similarly, like you said, inequities between industrialized and other, but like the inequities are also happening in industrialized nations. Like there's this discussion like people from Africa and black people don't also live in these countries, like they're somehow over there in Africa. And I think that's something to kind of maybe be careful of in terms of talking about like gendered bias, racial bias, etc. And also this, I think one of the negativities is that AI is seen as impartial, it is seen as objective, when if it's coded by humans, it's inherently subjective, it can never be objective.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to the kind of data which you use to train the system in the first place, which I think is underlying your point. If that contained those biases, they're not going to disappear as a yourself. Yep. Yep.
There's quite a few. I mean, one of them is AI has this thing called the black box effect. So when you put input data in and you get the output, sometimes it's hard to tell what's going on in the middle. So it's really hard to kind of understand why systems sometimes are making decisions. Of course, you've got the points of discrimination as well, like current facial recognition technology deployed by the Metropolitan Police and South Wales Police Departments. They've got a history of perhaps not being quite fair to certain groups of people. And again, you see in Facebook has quite a lot of antitrust practices as well through collecting data and having a technical monopoly over kind of the brokerage of information.
Yeah. I mean, that comes back to the ownership of the data and that sort of thing. Yeah. So there was a hand. Yeah.
This data collection issue happens with social media algorithms as well. So the algorithms are picking up on human behavior, but they can't distinguish the negative from the positive. So it's creating an image of the human society depending on what we input. So the people who are sharing negative or harmful content, the algorithm can't tell that that's negative. It just thinks that's what the humans are like. And it takes a human to sit there and actually watch it and flag it and realize that it's harmful and flag it as harmful so it doesn't reach us. So it's kind of painting a bad picture of or a skewed version of what the humans are like.
That comes back to this: do you intervene with the process, and do you train the system on what is good and bad?
It takes humans, and again, it's harmful for the human who has to sit there and watch Facebook videos that are, show crimes and harmful content. It takes humans at the moment.
Yeah. No, but your point is that it's kind of amoral, it has no moral value. If it's just data-driven, is a good one. Frigyskos.
I think it goes back to also your question around creativity, arts. Human civilization has been developing for the last few thousands of years. So where we are now has been a process that has taken us a few thousand years. Now, obviously, we don't have data on that. So is there a danger for AI to be developing on patterns that have been only for the last decade, 2 decades, 3 decades at max, and just forget about where we were and how we got to the point that we are today? So I think, going back to arts, AI will be able to create something like what Plato was saying. Will it reach that point? Create novels, stories, paintings. So I think because it's going to be lacking that human evolution that has taken us a very long time to get here, a lot of the time through very dark ages to get here, I think that's probably going to be the main issue with AI in the future.
Okay, was there another point over? So we'll hold these thoughts because I'm not in a position to answer all of them, but hold these thoughts as things. 101 really good issues. Sorry, you want another one? Yeah.
I have another one, more to do with mental health and how AI could potentially affect humans' mental health. Because we use our smartphone every day, and we know social media and everything can affect especially young people's mental health. And I'm wondering, as it has a lot of health benefits, because you can talk to the old lady that is suffering from dementia and stuff, but can it also be harmful to someone that, I don't know, it's already suffering from depression or other mental health issues by projecting or portraying images of human behavior that are inherently negative and bad?
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Coming thick and fast, I hadn't thought of all of these, yeah. Christine?
I think this, just picking up from the points about the bias and inequality, there's some interesting things to unpick there in terms of it has the capacity to reinforce some of those, age-old, horrific kind of social inequalities, but also it has this potential to create whole new kinds of social inequality that are almost insidious. They're harder to see because you can sense people's past behaviours and then use that back against them to predict their futures. You almost don't have to categorise them in those great big ways in order to discriminate against them. This is a kind of a reading list tip. If you've got any kind of taste for a kind of dystopian comedic kind of twist on this, the book is Quality Land. It's a land of Amazon stroke Tinder stroke autonomous cars gone completely insane. It's a top tip for a holiday read, Quality Land.
Yeah. It already happens. Things like I shouldn't mention a commercial company which rates your credit thing. You have no way of knowing how it's got to that. And indeed, you can't correct it if the information is wrong. So it's a bit like your black box that you were talking about earlier on. You've got no idea. The system says you're not creditworthy, and you haven't done anything. So. Okay, provocative bit now for this. You are sitting here. You are all social scientists of some sort, and AI is out there, and it's obviously we're suggesting you might want to engage in it. So what is the role of social science in this? Okay. Now, one of the things which we are reasonably good at is describing what's happened. And that's great. You can write books, you can write publications, etc., and you can have an academic career based on that. And you say, this, that, and the other happened, and this was the negative thing that happened. But if we're going to describe the impacts of AI, who are we describing it to, and for what purpose? And I think this is a question that we need to ask ourselves. If we are going to study the impacts of AI, why? What is the point? Is it going to be just some kind of glorified history? I just used the credit card example. That's already happened in the past. Let's say I can do what Christine was suggesting, and I can detail who was disadvantaged by that kind of process. Great, but is it anything more than a detailed history? And is that enough? Question mark. And then if we're going to step forward and say, okay, we're going to try and predict what's going to happen, or identify potential problems like we've been doing today. Okay, who are we doing that for? For whose benefit is that? And what is our target audience if we're going to do that? So, I used to, when I was here, I used to teach social psychology persuasion. Many of the early studies in this persuasion field were explicitly about trying to flog products and get people elected. Right? They were being done on behalf of the advertising industry and commercial interests and politicians. Then, of course, some nice people came along and said, actually, no, let's try and understand this in the abstract. But the early ones were about how do you get people to buy cigarettes, things like this. So if we're going to predict the potential outcomes of AI, who are we doing that for, whose benefit, and who is the target audience for that? And then, of course, we could go a step further and say, well, actually, we think some things are bad. So Amazon's interviewing thing, right? We might say, actually, this is bad, and we might want to say, stop it. Okay, don't do this. Okay? But if that is what we're going to do, what is our legitimacy for doing that? Why are we in some privileged position to be able to do that? What is it that we bring to it that makes what we say somehow more worth listening to than what anybody else says? So I think those questions are ones which hopefully you'll be thinking about anyway in the context of your own research. But what are social scientists doing? In one of my previous roles, I was the chair of the Association of Heads of Psychology Departments, and we used to every so often have to lobby various government agencies for money or recognition or something like this. And we were largely ignored, which is a different story. But the message we often got back was, well, what have you told us that's really useful to UK PLC? And every so often ESRC has done exercises to try and remind government what it is that social science does that's useful for UK PLC. But if you sit in there and you're just saying, oh, look, this isn't very good, is that going to be enough? Is that worth doing? So questions I think you possibly might want to ask about it. So if we're going to engage with AI, what is the purpose of the engagement? And I think if we're not clear about why we're doing it, a good chance we'll be ignored, I think, is the thing. So any thoughts? This is a sort of open bit of this now. Questions, comments, things which you've thought about, which have just occurred to you? Yeah?
I'm doing a socio-legal pathway, so I come at this from a legal point of view. And obviously, it's a regulatory nightmare. Law, historically, when it comes to technology, was always behind the curve. And the problem is it's moving so fast. And it is going to require a lot of law to regulate and to keep these things under certain control, but it's just never going to get there fast enough. Really, the speed at which it's going. I mean, how the law copes with it will be very interesting to see. Certainly struggling at the moment.
The good news for lawyers is they'll be in work for a while. They may not have their jobs taken away. Yeah.
I mean, on the point of law, I'm specialising in facial recognition regulation, so I can say for certainty that the law is, not moving in the direction perhaps it should be in terms of the UK government's approach. At the moment, they're seeking for essentially a deregulation, and in the context of facial recognition, rather than implementing laws, they're seeking for police-led guidance, which allows them to set their own operational boundaries. So again, it's like when we're talking about the role of law in this, I think that one of the questions, especially from the perspective of the UK government at the moment, is there a need for it? Which obviously there is, but I think that's something that is missing in the narrative at the moment, the dominant one from government at least.
Yeah, I mean, facial recognition is a nightmare, isn't it? I mean, potential misuses of that. Do I
think we're potentially, we already at the moment see, climate anxiety. So people just living, being terrified about what's happening to the future of the planet from, an environmental point of view. But I think it's really possible that in the next 10 years we could see some kind of, data anxiety. Because, you even see it now with every new website you go on, you have to reject cookies, go through 50 different tick boxes to opt out of stuff, or your data gets sold to push these Amazon algorithms and train data sets and stuff like that. So I think that it could become even more prevalent. I know at the moment on my webcam I have a piece of tape over it because I don't trust people to not turn it on.
I'll turn it on for you. Yeah.
But yeah, I think we might end up seeing something like that happening in the next 10 years or so, where it's just so prevalent, so persistent. And it does shape things like surveillance, your life chances if you can get a mortgage or things like that. It becomes more and more obviously present. I think it could have a real widespread mental health impact.
Okay, I mean, just on that one, sorry, go on, yes.
I was just going to say, it's because my PhD is on chronic kidney disease, so it's really hard to think of potentially how it could help because majority of them are kind of older. Yeah. But on the flip side, it's interesting, but at the same time, I'm thinking whoever's going to be putting the data into this and setting it up will almost have power over everybody else. And it just makes me feel do us then become subhumans, that things that we're doing, our decisions are being made already before we get there. And it's kind of what's the movie, Ghost in the Shell or something, that we live in some kind of alternate reality whereby our decisions are already made and what makes us human, our personality is already, it's gone.
Yep. I mean, that's the nightmare scenario, as you say, of various Hollywood films. Yes. Yeah, great, thank you. Do people think that's likely? I mean, I mentioned about the democratization of the code, that you can, if you're reasonably together, you can make a machine learning system in R or Python very quickly. Will there be counter ones? So, say there's this big brother type system which is doing exactly what you just said. It's open to other people to come up with another system which challenges that, I guess.
Chris, an alternative way around, or sort of a way around that would be that if the code is open and people, the idea of understanding how these systems works is a bit of a complicated one, but if people know how, have a broadish knowledge of how these work, then you can get challenged, you can get an expert witness for the defence saying, okay, I'm going to explain to you what the problem is with this face recognition system is, and it's not very good at discriminating between faces in this group of people, but it's very good at that group of people. You've got somebody in this group of people, so you can't be very sure you've got the right person. So that's would be another approach that might mitigate some of the bad effects.
I also think it will lead to an increase in cybersecurity, need for cybersecurity, not just because of people interacting online, but all these benefits that come with AI. Someone could be on the other side, do something similar, hack into the system and cause catastrophe in an environment or a society. So both the good part of it, but someone else could learn could also apply what they know in creating this system for the negative, and in the end, disrupt the system.
Yeah, and we live in hope that our security services are already doing this. I mean, any of you watching that Channel 4 series at the moment? I can't remember what it's called, the one about the cyber attacks from Russia. No, it's on Sunday evenings, but anyway, worthwhile, it's on that topic. Yes?
Yeah, I think so. Firstly, is that I think discussions that we're having are still prospective, like in the future, but it's not in the future, it's now, like it's already happening, both in terms of the things we fear and also in terms of counters. So I think like a really prominent example is from like the Hong Kong revolution of people like learning AI and machine learning and using that to hack the system and disrupt it, using the kind of facial masks that were disrupting facial surveillance technologies, and people kind of using covert methods of like hacking. And I think this also like raises a question of like, when you're doing research and you're having these conversations, like, yeah, who is it for? Like, is it to speak to the government, or is it to actually help people who are finding ways around this? And I think when we have those anxieties about, increased AI surveillance and taking away choice, it's a kind of more futuristic and technological kind of way of talking about like government surveillance. Like our choice has already been taken away. It's not if it gets taken away by AI. So I think just, having those conversations around that, and like just for context, like my PhD is on AI, specifically in terms of how it's represented and reinforcing notions of human and non-humanness. And the whole idea of that is to go, like say to people, in science fiction you're thinking about these androids, but they're already here. Like we already have an android citizen, so it's not a future fear to have it to like, oh my god, this is happening now. But I think the way that it's depicted is something far off, when I think we all need to be thinking about how our research is reinforcing or countering.
Any other thoughts? Yeah, start down here. Two more, then I think we have to stop because we've run over time. Yeah, two.
Just on the mental health applications, it's obviously a lot cheaper to make a avatar available to lonely old people than to provide human interaction. And I feel it's a bit like sort of painkiller, like loneliness is emotional pain that shows that something's wrong, and it wouldn't just be older people, it could also be teenagers who should be learning to make connections in the real world. And it feels as if giving people sort of painkiller for that stops us as individuals and as a society from addressing that actual loneliness, and then that's just going to cause deeper problems.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, are you dealing with the symptoms rather than the underlying causes? Yeah, I suppose the thing you'd have to engage with is would we ever provide the equivalent of the avatar for the number of old people we have? That would be the counter argument, I guess. Last one of these, yeah.
Just to buttress on the security and also potential mistakes in creating these things. Whether the creators of these AI, we humans, are we more on the reactive point of view, in the sense that until something has happened before we have the countermeasure or how to so are we reacting to something that means a lot of damage has been done first before coming up to create a solution, or are we thinking ahead of potential solutions to something that hasn't happened yet but we're able to like capture it?
Yeah, I'll go back to my very first slide on that one, second slide, this one here. All of these negative things that followed from TVs and computers and internets and stuff like that. Obviously I was a kid then, I don't know, but I'm not sure whether social science got up and said, hey look, these are potential problems. If you look at them, to us now they seem completely obvious. Getting people to sit down in front of screens for great ages can't be good for you, and you don't need to be an exercise scientist to know that. So was that not thought of? And do we have to wait till now, 50 years later, to know that this is a problem that might need addressing? And so I think, we need to be doing that kind of work now. What do we think the potential negatives are going to be? Are there some ones which are fairly obvious? That there might be bad people out there doing your trolling and so on. I mean, obviously we've just talked about that, but there are other ones as well. Yeah. Okay, I think we're supposed to do something else now. It's coffee break. Okay, coffee break. And for when? Till when do we come back? 10:30. Okay, so coffee break outside. See you back here at 10:30. Thank you.